We didn't call it the cloud. But I think it is, as I look back on this, I'm not so old, but I'm getting older. And as I look back on this, I think it really is fascinating how far we've come and how much of this stuff has hit the mainstream now. I can pick up the New York Times and I can read articles about data centers and clouds and mega services and energy and challenges of how to manage all those things and manage them together. But about that time, sometime after working on a lot of that, I started thinking about the question of, well, how do we now address this challenge that Tracy mentioned of communities, right? How do we manage infrastructures that actually span multiple different owners? The internet spans multiple different owners. There's nobody who owns the internet, and it is managed in some kind of coordinated way. But if we're going to have ensembles of servers and networks that are dynamically manageable, programmatically, software defined, as we say today, on the fly, according to need, how are we going to get all those different pieces to work together when there are lots of different players involved who own different parts of them and have different competing goals and different ways of managing? So we started work on a project that we call Orca, Open Resource Control Architecture, which was really all about federation. How do we build communities around these pools of resources that are distributed? And so a lot of that was looking at the question of how do we reason about the policies, what resources are available, how they can be used, what are the policies for managing them, and in particular, trust. Who has to trust whom to do what in order to make something happen? And that project actually that brings me to the next part. I think Glenn asked me to talk about NC leads and national networking initiatives. And this is really, this was a point in my career when, this happens to professors. After they get tenure, they start thinking about, gee, maybe publishing papers isn't the only thing. I would like to bring some of this stuff forward and really find a way to have an impact. And it's been the investment in this area in the networking infrastructure that's here and that gave rise to Ilya's Breakable Experimental Network and the RENC organization that Ilya's group is in, the work that MCNC has done that really gave us a vehicle to do this coming forward. Because as Ilya mentioned, this was really about the time that NSF's Genie Initiative, Global Environment for Network Innovation, was really starting to fire up and gather steam. And so Ilya approached me and told me about Ben, which I was wildly excited about. And we started looking at the question of, well, gee, could we use this Orca framework to control multiple different kinds of infrastructure, including dynamic network pipes, something that Ilya understands very well. And Glenn was talking about earlier with channelization of pipes into the home. These fiber strands that are around North Carolina and that are running Ben are also channelizable. We can write a program that reaches out and establishes new channels on the fly between the different campuses and links them together and links them with cloud resources on the campuses. And that was the idea that we had and that we were working toward. And it turned out that it dovetailed very nicely with the agenda of the Genie Initiative, which on its face was an architecture for building network testbeds for researchers in network science and engineering to use. But actually we realized could secretly be, I don't want to use the word co-opted, but steered in the direction of actually putting together an architecture blueprint for federated networks and clouds. And that, of course, it appears, I hope, and it seems to be the case, that some of the ideas that have come out of Genie in that 5-year development could be the basis for a platform going forward for the US Ignite initiative, which is another initiative that Glenn spoke about. So this is actually, it's been a really interesting experience. In some sense, I might go back to writing papers. The Genie Initiative, this is all about having groups of people with different visions. And it's like a standards body. One thing you don't really want to do, anybody who's been involved in a standards process, it's not necessarily something you really want to be involved in. Well, this is a standards process where we try to standardize over architecture for something that we don't even really know exactly what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to support and foster innovation. So you can be on 2-hour-long teleconferences with people saying, okay, well, what are actually the requirements to support and foster innovation? And the answer is we don't know, right? Because we haven't imagined yet some of the things that this infrastructure can be used for. But there are deployments going out, and in fact, a major deployment is Ilya's project that I have the privilege of being involved in, that Ilya runs, as I will always be the one to tell you, which is this ExoGenie project, which is a deployment of, it was funded by National Science Foundation, $2 million. It is a national deployment of small-scale clouds, racks, as Ilya said, running standard OpenStack cloud software with a bunch of our special sauce on top of it for instrumentation and monitoring and control and orchestration. It has OpenFlow enabled network switch at its core, so SDN is a core part of this. And it links up to various transport fabrics, national transport fabrics, and regional. Ben, of course, was the first one that we could programmatically control, but also the national Lambda rail and Internet 2, and of course all our access for that comes through MCNC. And so that deployment is moving forward. We're deploying racks, cloud racks at a number of universities linked by a number of national networks and with linkages to international networks. And what this is really all about is, Glenn mentioned it briefly, but Genie has this idea of a slice abstraction. This is a Genie slide. It says that a researcher, that's a test tube guy there on the left, a researcher, as he's affectionately known, a researcher can write a program that reaches out and allocates resources across all of these different campuses and networks with appropriate authority and privilege and so on. Safety and security is an important part. And build an end-to-end environment, a virtual execution context for a new kind of distributed service or experiment, a new way of managing networks that spans all of these different resources and is appropriately contained and isolated, both to protect Test Tube Guy and his system from the world, but also to protect the world from Test Tube Guy and his system, whatever it might be. This is one of the things we don't want to do is end up on the front page of the New York Times for having done some damage with one of these experiments run amok. But that really brings me to the question of, okay, well, what is this good for? You know, I'd like to be able to spout forth visions for how, you know, all the new wonderful kinds of services that are going to be built on top of this, as Glenn has done, and as Glenn is marshaling people to do in the US Ignite project. But as I said, I'm a glorified plumber in some sense. I really like to think about the pieces and how they fit together to build interesting, complex environments that meet these kinds of needs. So I think of all this as tinker toys, right? What we've done is we've created a context in which you can allocate little pieces of virtual infrastructure from different suppliers of lots of different kinds, and we can reason and introspect on what those resources are and how they can fit together in order to build different kinds of environments that meet different kinds of needs. So we've essentially given, or will be giving, a community of researchers and others, Ignite application developers and so on, a really very powerful, very interesting tinker toy environment to do things that they couldn't do before. The future Usenets and all of that has computing integrated into the network, which allows implementation of different views of how we can incorporate intelligence into the network. And of course, one of the things that people are really talking about using this sort of capability for is integrating the loop of sensors to information to control for the network itself and for that infrastructure, but also for other kinds of infrastructure that are intertwined with the network and that are really, really important in our society, energy and water networks and first responders for emergencies and all of those kinds of things. And so that's really actually what I think of as sort of being the place that we're going with all of this. And this comes back to some of the things that Oscar was saying about software-defined networking and smart networking. Really what we want is smart infrastructure. I might be stealing a little bit of a page from IBM here with their Smarter Planet initiative, although really it seems to me it's not really the planet we should be worried about. It's the fact that we all live on the planet and we need to be smart, right, about how we use it and how we live on it and how we respond to changes. But this is a problem, this is a whole set of challenges that we see here just in our networks and in our infrastructure systems. You know, if we can have coordinated but distributed and decentralized monitoring and control of rich infrastructures that that are dynamic themselves and face dynamic needs, but also exist in dynamic environments. Dynamic in ways that we really want, and also dynamic in some ways that we don't want. We have to be able to respond to change, even if it is thrust upon us, and we didn't ask for it. And so that's really what a lot of this is about, is incorporating intelligence into these rich, interconnected infrastructures. So that's what I think about, and I guess that's pretty much what I have to say. And again, I'd like to thank Glenn for inviting me and the organizers for putting together this wonderful event. It's been great meeting all of you and talking to folks and hearing what people have to say. Thank you.
To conclude, the first thing I want to do is, obviously, an effort like this takes a lot of people involved in the organizing. I don't know if I can use the word extreme team, but the extreme team was great. Teresa Cargill, Greg Cross, Deborah Robinson, Christy Parker, Allison Gordon, Patricia Jones, Zach Hayes, and several others from Extreme were involved in putting this together. From the MCNC team, Darlene Heath, who is our events person extraordinaire, director of events and community engagement, and just does a tremendous job with everything that we do. I'm sure Darlene's head's spinning right now in terms of one of the missions she's taken on for us is training and outreach, and I think this is probably the first in a series of probably once every 6 months events where we get more topical, I think, into the future, but reaching out to Oscar and his team and RTP and maybe doing some topical things with different audiences around the state, I think would make sense. And Noah Garrett with NGC Communications, who is our PR consulting firm for MCNC. It's difficult to wrap up everything that's been said today, but I think in a simple 2-line statement, we have built a great foundation and a great history of innovation in this space in North Carolina, but the opportunity lies before us. You heard it from Jeff, you heard it from Glenn, you heard it from Oscar today in the panels, that we're only as good as how we move forward with the opportunity we've been given. We have an opportunity to lead the world in new and emerging technologies and applications that cross many, many spheres of research. We also have the opportunity to lead the world in infrastructure and intelligent infrastructure because we have assets at our disposal that are in the experimental range. Let's not give up this leadership position. Let's continue to think about how we invest in it as an organization. We're making a really stark transition at MCNC in this next year. We have been head down, digging 3-foot trenches around the state and laying conduit in those trenches and laying fiber for the last 2.5 years. And while that seems simple when I roll it off the tongue, I didn't mention anything about the Environmental Protection Agency or North Carolina DOT or other things that we've had to face in getting that done. And we've done a tremendous job managing that. But now the truth of the matter is the infrastructure is in place. And we have got to change to communicating with our community and with beyond our community of how we use this. And we've got to use it to put great minds like Ilya and Jeff to their creative max and think about the next generation of things. So I'll leave you with that today. There are box lunches outside that are for you. And we appreciate you coming and hope it's been a worthwhile day and investment of your time. Thank you. And don't forget your cards.
Any of these things we'd love to have.